Hey guys, we're your hosts,
Jess,
and Fenella, and this is.
Cozy Crime Club.
Each episode, we explore real cases, from the eerie to the outrageous, with curiosity, empathy, and just the right amount of dark humor. So pour yourself a big mug of something warm, tea, coffee, or maybe something a little stronger, grab a blanket, and settle in. Welcome to the club.
Welcome back to episode 3. Hello.
Hey guys.
Hey, Fenella.
So Jess, what have you brought for us this week?
Actually, this week, Fenella, this case really struck a chord with me. I saw a documentary about it. I just couldn't stop thinking about it. I actually ran out and I bought a book, which I have here, actually.
Oh my god, yeah, right.
Yeah, it was written by the detective who worked the case for years. 2 wives, 2 violent murders and a fight for justice. Do you know this case about Thomas and Jean Keir?
I do know a bit about it, but I did know you were potentially going to be bringing this to the club, so I have not been paying any attention to it for a long time. So I'm actually really excited to be told and get stuck into it and reminded of exactly what went down and probably find out some stuff that I don't know yet.
There was so much information in this book, and it was really amazing that it was written from the investigator's point of view. Even just going a little bit into how that bled into his personal life as well. It was just super interesting. So I would highly recommend anyone, if they're interested in this case, to go out and buy this book. But yeah, it was a really great book, and I will link it below if anyone is interested. We'll definitely do that. Now, Jean Keir, she was born in Australia in the 1960s. She was bright, fun-loving. She had striking shoulder-length brown hair and a slim build, and she was very warm with just vibrant energy. Her heritage was a mix of Greek, Spanish, and Filipina, and she came from a tight-knit, loving family. Both her parents worked, her mother Christine as a machinist in a furniture factory. The factory was managed by 23-year-old Thomas Keir. One day Keir arrived at Christine's home to drop off some cushions for repair. He was greeted by Jean, who was just 14 at the time. Jean went to find her mum. She's literally like, "Mum, there's a man at the door and he is the ugliest man I have ever seen. He looks like Frankenstein." And
oh
he has,
God.
this is an actual quote that her mum provided. And then he has one big long eyebrow. And he absolutely did. So for Thomas Keir, though, it was love at first sight, or lust. He played it cool at first, chatting with Jean when she waited for her mother at the factory. He gave her chocolates. He paid her generously for sewing buttons. Her parents were wary, especially about the age gap, but Christine felt safe with Jean working there, since she herself was always around. When Jean was 15, Keir asked to take her on a date. Christine flat out refused. She was too young. After that, Keir began turning up at their house constantly. He dressed himself up nice, he was friendly, polite. Jean's father, Cliff, knew Keir from around the neighbourhood, and he didn't like him. Couldn't say why, he just didn't trust him. When Keir visited, Cliff often walked straight out the door to the pub. Still, Keir kept up the charm. On Jean's 16th birthday, he showed up with 16 red roses for Jean, a bottle of champagne for Christine, and beer for Cliff. When he asked again to date Jean, Cliff finally relented. Only on one condition. If Keir wanted to court his daughter, he owed a case of beer every week. For the next 3 years, Keir delivered. I'm obviously not a professional, but I'm like, that's just love bombing. Like, just bang, 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 trying to woo the parents and trying to woo her. And just the fact that she's still a teenager, you know, she's vulnerable to flattery, and her parents as well, especially Christine, her mum, who worked for Keir. He was her boss. And I just wonder how much pressure they felt. I'm uncomfortable with that whole dynamic.
Yeah. It's a fine line. Totally feel the discomfort.
Well, Thomas Andrew Keir, he was born on January 1st, 1958. He's actually born in England before migrating to Australia. He was very tall, dark-haired, and unmistakable. A heavy brow sat like a ledge across his face, almost a single unbroken line. Think of Lurch from the Addams Family, but strip away the warmth, the loyalty, and the humanity. What remained was something cold and unreadable. Descriptions of Keir paint a consistent picture. He was obsessive, possessive, controlling, and pathologically jealous. On the surface, he was calm, too calm. His expression rarely shifted. His face stayed blank. His voice stayed level. People who interacted with him often said the same thing. You never knew what he was thinking. It was impossible to read. Perfect for poker, dangerous for everything else. Behind that deadpan exterior was something sharper, though. Cunning, calculating, and quietly dangerous. Keir wasn't impulsive. He was patient, and that made him even more unsettling. Jean's parents were simple, trusting people, maybe even a little naive. Christine later said, "Girls don't like him. They would laugh at him, even at work. I felt sorry for him." Thomas seemed like a loner, awkward, maybe misunderstood. He took Jean to the movies, but with Cliff's reservations. Someone from the family always tagged along, whether her brother, her sister, or Christine herself. At 17, Keir gave Jean a ring. One night, they went out dancing, but when Jean got home, she was upset. She was furious. Keir hadn't let her dance with anyone else. She tore off the ring, threw it at him, and stormed out. A year later, Thomas proposed. Her parents didn't object this time. Jean was already pregnant. It was August 1984, so she was 18, Thomas was 26 at that time. Her sister would later say that Jean had cold feet. She wanted to call it off, but the family reassured her. Everyone gets nervous before a wedding, it's just jitters. So the ceremony went ahead. They stayed in Tregear, not far from Jean's parents. On December 31st, 1984, Jean gave birth to their son Michael. Motherhood lit her up for a while, but it didn't last. Her family watched the joy fade from her face. Jean began to wither, losing weight and going quiet. The sparkle in her eyes vanished. Her smile disappeared. Something was deeply wrong. Keir's control over her was tightening. Friends and family saw it. His jealousy, his obsessive need to possess her completely. He often left work early to check on her. He was jealous of her hugging family members, even her own son. She started putting on makeup after leaving the house because he'd explode if he saw it on her. She lied about job interviews just to get lunch with friends. When she broke one of his invisible rules, he wouldn't yell. He'd go cold. He'd withdraw, ice her out for days, making her doubt herself, wonder what she'd done wrong. Manipulation, gaslighting, isolation, and control. Jean was in a walking nightmare. She was trapped, surveyed, second-guessing her every move. And the people around her were beginning to see it.
This is terrible.
It's really horrendous domestic violence in this case. Jean adored her son, though. He was her world, and her family knew she would never leave him. She loved too fiercely and she fought too hard. But behind closed doors, Jean was fighting for survival. She had to hide her contraceptive pills. Keir was trying to force her to have another baby. She told her sister Fiona, I just want to say, as much as I researched this, there was so many conflicting things whether Fiona was her sister or her best friend. Regardless, obviously super close. And she told Fiona that she wanted to leave Keir, but was terrified he'd track her down, kill her. Would her son be safe? Bruises appeared on her arms. Friends noticed. She brushed them off, always trying to protect the people she loved from the truth. Until one day she cracked. She told Fiona everything. Keir was raping her. He was tying her up, controlling every part of her body and her mind. He toyed with her mentally, jumping out from corners to scare her, watching her through windows, and then gaslighting her, saying, "You're making things up. You're crazy."
Oh my God.
This is deranged. Sometimes you just have to sit with that for a moment, though, because it's so hard to imagine living that life and having the person you're married to do something like that. While Jean, she told her closest friends how depressed she was. Keir was gambling away their money. Her mother, Christine, even had to help cover their bills. Jean wanted to leave, but she couldn't bear to leave Michael behind. And she knew if she took him, Keir might follow through on the threats he'd made. This is really hectic, but there's just like a warning. But Keir told her, "If you leave me, I'll cut you up and feed you to the dogs." Fiona heard it with her own ears more than once. He'd talk openly how to dispose of a body, peel off the flesh for the dogs, grind the bones into fertilizer, burn their hair. Cops are idiots, he said. They only catch the ones dumb enough to open their mouths. Fiona was the only one still visiting the house regularly. She wanted Keir to see that Jean wasn't alone. The people were watching. That someone still had her back. One night, Fiona was there when baby Michael started crying. Keir slapped him across the face, hard. The child screamed louder, and Keir laughed. He mocked him, imitated his cries. That moment shattered any remaining doubt. Fiona saw him clearly for what he was. A predator, a monster. So, again, maybe just sitting with that for a sec. It's that part about his abuse towards his own child, Michael. I feel like everything that Keir did was very much about domination and control. I don't think it was about love or his family. And I don't think he wanted another child with Jean because he cared and that he wanted that child. It seemed like he wanted to tighten Jean's environment, even further and isolate her. I don't think his abuse towards Michael was separate. I think it was part of that system of control. If Jean is thinking, even my son isn't safe, what power does she have to fight? In 1987, Jean found a rare moment to breathe. She slipped out of the house, lying to Keir about where she was going, and headed to Sydney Harbour. Sitting alone on the rocks, looking out at the Opera House and ferries drifting across the water, she quietly asked herself, how did it come to this? A stranger named Carl Needing noticed her. She looked lonely, sad. He stopped to ask if she was okay. They talked. They walked through the Botanic Gardens. They had dinner. That night, Jean went home with him to his Bondi apartment, and they slept together. Afterwards, Jean went straight to her mother's house and told her everything. Christine urged caution. Don't tell Thomas, don't start a fight. But Jean didn't listen. She went home and confessed it all. Keir exploded. He grabbed her by the arm, shaking her, demanding to know where Carl lived. Jean screamed. He tightened his grip and told her, tell me or I'll kill you right here. Out of fear, she gave him the general area. The next day at work, Keir approached Christine. He was pale, expressionless. He said, Jeannie told me about the fella and where he lives. Don't try to stop me. I'm going to find him tonight and I'm going to break his neck. Christine rushed to Jean, begged her to lie, to tell Keir that she'd made the whole thing up just to make him jealous. Jean agreed. She told him it had all been a fabrication. Keir seemed to believe her, and things settled, briefly. But Jean couldn't stop thinking about Carl. She called him 4 times over the next 2 weeks, asking to see him again. Carl was reluctant. He didn't want to be involved with a married woman. But Jean was insistent. They met again. This time Carl was uneasy. Something didn't feel right. He told Jean he'd drive her home, but she refused. Instead, she asked him to drop her at the train station. She didn't want Keir to know. Do you have any thoughts about, her meeting Carl and what happened?
It's kind of a tough one because there's, she is a married woman and she's a mother and everything as well. But at the same time, it sounds like that was a moment of absolute reprieve for her. And that might have given her a glimpse that she could maybe actually get out of it or not be in this Groundhog Day, it sounds like.
So true.
What were you thinking?
I just wonder if Carl was her first real choice. After her being groomed from such a young age, manipulated and love-bombed by Keir.
Yeah.
She got proposed to, she was already pregnant. Was the marriage even a decision that she made? Or just, she just went with it. Carl wasn't like a fling. I think he represented freedom for her and maybe like an attempt to reclaim her life and her body and her mind. And I think Keir would have known that if she was defying him, it's that loss of control.
Sounding very much like the classic, he wanted her circle to be really small. She gets to run everything past him and he decides everything. But that would have been a real window into, she doesn't need him. She doesn't need him to make decisions for her. she can make her own decisions. That would be a huge threat to what he needs out of the situation, which is controlling her, as you were saying.
Yeah, absolutely. I think she had just proven that, she could leave.
So, big moment.
Yeah. Jean's lie hadn't worked. Keir's anger only escalated. Eventually, he forced Jean into the car and drove her to Bondi. He made her point out Carl's apartment block. She claimed she didn't remember which unit. Keir knocked on door after door, asking if anyone knew Carl. Eventually, someone pointed him in the right direction. They drove home in silence. The next day, Keir returned to Bondi, alone. He planned to, in his own words, punch Carl's head in. But when Carl arrived home, Keir hesitated. Carl was bigger, stronger, and intimidating.
Oh, was he?
Suddenly, Keir's bravado vanished. Instead of a fight, he played the victim. He told Carl he was Jean's husband, that she wanted to leave him, that he was heartbroken, desperate. He poured out his marriage problems like a man defeated. He was able to convince Carl to help him. Carl, caught off guard by the whole encounter, called Jean while Keir stood beside him. He said, "You really should try to sort things out with your husband. Tom really wants to make your marriage work." Jean agreed flatly. She'd try. The next day, Keir went into Christine's work. He told her what happened, and Christine, still trying to keep the peace, said she'd talk to Jean. When she did, Jean snapped. "I can't stand being married to Tom. Carl is special. I can actually talk to him. That's more than I can say for Tom." From there, the situation at home deteriorated fast. Screaming matches became frequent. The violence escalated. In January 1988, Jean phoned her mum one night after another fight. Keir had punched her in the face. The blow knocked her down the hallway. She said she got up and hit him back. Sounding desperate, Jean told Christine she didn't know how much more she could take. Christine offered to come over, but Jean refused. The next day, Christine confronted Keir at work. He tried to downplay it, said he'd only pushed her, and she hit him. Christine didn't care. She told him he'd promised to protect her daughter, never hurt her, and she warned him, "Don't you dare touch her again." The same day, Jean finally confided in her father. She begged him, "I need to get away just for a little while." Cliff looked at his daughter and barely recognized her. Nervous, hollow-eyed, a shadow of herself. He told her to go, to their small family caravan in Culburra, where her sister was staying. Jean agreed. She told Keir she needed time to think. Culburra was a beachside town. It was 2.5 hours south of where they lived. But Keir said, you can only go on one condition. She wasn't allowed to take Michael, their son. When she got there, it just felt like she could breathe again. She could think about what was she going to do. Her sister Heather and Heather's boyfriend were already at the family caravan. For the first time in a long time, Jean had space, real space, to imagine a future that didn't include Thomas Keir. But Keir wasn't done with her. While Jean was gone, his anger simmered. Then it boiled over. He got in the car and drove to Culburra. There's not a lot of detailed information about what happened next, but in a Channel 9 interview years later, Jean's sisters described the moment that Keir arrived at the caravan, and it was just chaos. So Jean saw his car pull up, and she bolted inside, panicked. "He's going to take me. He's going to take me," she screamed to her sister. Heather tried to reassure her. "He can't take you if you don't want to go." But that wasn't true, not then, and not with Keir. He stormed in. He grabbed Jean. He dragged her towards the car. She fought him, she screamed. She broke free and she ran. But he caught her. He threw her back in the car. Heather and her boyfriend watched in stunned silence. Jean's sister, in the interview, she was saying growing up it was drilled into them. You don't get involved in a married couple's arguments. It's just how it was. You stayed out of it. Jean was screaming for help though, and Heather froze. Looking back, Heather said she would do everything differently now. But at the time, young and unsure and taught not to interfere, she stood still. She watched her sister get dragged away. It was the last time she ever saw her. Ugh, gives me goosebumps.
That's a really tough thing to hear. It's really difficult to just hear her sister reflecting on that moment.
It was really difficult to hear. On the drive home, after that chaotic moment, Keir had stopped for petrol. Jean seized the moment. She slipped out of the car and she ran. She hitchhiked to Bondi, to Carl Needing's apartment. Probably the only person she thought might be able to protect her, someone Keir was actually afraid of. Jean was isolated. Keir had cut her off from friends. Family could only do so much. And in 1988, there were no shelters in every suburb, no helplines on billboards. Domestic violence was still called a private matter. Jean didn't have options. She had Carl. But that night, Keir called. He knew where she was. He demanded that Carl bring her home. Late on February the 8th, Carl drove Jean back to her house. He left her with Keir. Since the night of February 8th, 1988, no one has seen or heard from Jean Keir. She never contacted her son. She never called her parents, people she was absolutely inseparable from. She never reached out to a friend, never accessed her bank account, never sought medical care, not once. There's never been a verified sighting of her anywhere. Jean was, at the time, she was 23 years old. A mother, a sister, a daughter, a woman in crisis who had made repeated attempts to escape, and then gone. Thomas Keir has never admitted to killing Jean. According to Keir, Jean walked out on February the 9th to be with a lover. He claims she called him 10 days later to say she was pregnant and the baby wasn't his. Then he says she called again in November. According to Keir, Jean told him she'd had a baby girl. She said she had a good job now and had broken things off with Carl. He says he asked her to come home. She refused and hung up. And it doesn't stop there. So Keir later claimed that Jean called once more in April 1989. This is over a year since she had gone missing. And this time she demanded to know who the Vietnamese girl was that he'd been seen with. He told her it was just her cousin and that he wanted a divorce. He says Jean screamed at him and he hung up. He also claims that Jean returned to the house multiple times while he was out. He says in May 1988, she left her wedding and engagement rings and the front door key next to an ashtray in the lounge. He says things in the cupboards had been moved, but nothing was taken. And in June 1989, he says he found Alpine cigarette butts in the ashtray. Jean was the only person he knew who smoked them. He claimed she still had a key to the back door.
This man had utter control over this woman. And now all of a sudden he's got no idea where she is. She's coming and going, smoking cigarettes in his ashtray and then just like a ghost. This guy is just a big talker.
That's all he does. And he's so, I've seen a few interviews of him and just, he's so cool and calm. It's very strange to see. I think, like you said, like, what are we supposed to believe that, Jean, who told multiple people she was terrified of him and had bruises, she just stopped by there and had a cigarette.
It just doesn't add up at all. Like, he was all over her when she was with Carl doing whatever, and now he has no idea where she is. He's just like, yeah, that's fine. She just left.
I know, she started a whole new life with this mystery baby, a mystery job, and not one single call to anyone.
In a mystery place.
Yeah. And she didn't contact one single person in her life except him.
Question marks.
Huge. While Jean was officially reported missing on May the 1st, 1988, by her sister and her father, the case was closed just 5 months later, October 30th, 1988. There was no resolution and no answers. Little pause there, because that's Jean's story as we know it. That's explaining what happened up to her disappearance and after. Moving on to a second victim now, Rosalina. Rosalina Canizado. She was born August 26, 1966 in the Philippines. She was warm, intelligent, and deeply devoted to her family. Her mother would later describe her as helpful, thoughtful, and loving. She never caused trouble, she excelled at school, and cared for her siblings. After graduating from the Polytechnic University of the Philippines with a Bachelor of Commerce, majoring in accounting, her parents gifted her a trip to Australia, a reward for her years of dedication. She went to visit family. While in Sydney for a family wedding, Rosalina was introduced to Thomas Keir. The person who introduced them? It was Christine, Jean's mother. At the time, Christine still believed her daughter had run away. She hadn't yet faced the possibility that Jean had been murdered. She believed that if Keir moved on, if he fell in love with someone else, Jean might come back. So in what she thought was an act of healing, she introduced her grieving son-in-law to one of her own family members, Rosalina. Rosalina was Jean's cousin. Jean called him and said, "Who is the Vietnamese girl I've heard or seen you're hanging out with?" And he's like, "That's your cousin." But she wasn't Vietnamese. She's from the Philippines. That was just from Tom's word of mouth. Like, that's what he had said. So Christine introduced them at this family wedding that Rosalina was at. And Keir pursued Rosalina relentlessly.
Oh my gosh, we've seen that before.
Exactly, just like we had seen with Jean. During this period as well, he divorced Jean, despite the fact that she had never researched. Yes, I was like, how? How? She hadn't resurfaced, never signed any papers, hasn't said a word. But the court accepted his claim that she had abandoned him, that she'd run off with another man, and they divorced them, which I didn't even think was possible.
Okay, I didn't know that was possible either.
Yeah.
Especially, it's not been that long, has it?
No.
I mean, I feel like we're in the same period of 1 or 2 years here or something.
Correct. I was just about to say he flew to the Philippines in November 1989. So that was maybe 18 months later?
Yeah.
Or less than 2 years after Jean had vanished. He and Rosalina were married in the Philippines.
Oh my gosh.
Yeah. So he got the
Wasted
divorce.
no time.
I know. So they returned to Australia. Rosalina worked her butt off. She was a qualified accountant. She became a silent partner in Keir's upholstery business. Keir wasn't actually managing things well, financially or otherwise. Rosalina gave him money to help relaunch his business. She also worked 2 jobs to keep them afloat. So if we just think about that, so Jean's own mother, desperately just hoping that her daughter is alive, she introduces Keir to Rosalina. And not only had he quietly divorced Jean without proof of life, he found a new wife and he was now living off her hard work and her money. I feel like it's just, hello, it's the same pattern, the same charm he seems to be able to, spin, and just the same control.
He's so attached to this family.
I think he's
I don't know where I'm going with that, but he's just so in with this family.
I think he is. He likes that control, and he's already, like you said, involved with that family.
Yeah.
And it gets so much worse. It was just less than 2 years since Jean disappeared to when he married Rosalina.
Yeah.
And then after just 18 months of marriage, Rosalina was found dead. On the 13th of April 1991, her body was found in the very home that she shared with Thomas Keir, the same house Jean had disappeared from just a few years earlier. Rosalina had been strangled, murdered using the cord of a bedside lamp. The cord was still wrapped around her neck when police arrived. Her body was left on the bed, and then she was set alight. Rosalina was 24 years old. It's difficult to comprehend the violence of what happened to her. She wasn't just killed, she was desecrated. She was so young and so far from home. She had no real safety net in Australia. She'd come here with a degree, a future, and a heart big enough to give someone like Thomas Keir a chance. She didn't know what she was walking into. So back to this book, written by the detective, so Peter Seymour. He was assigned to that case. He got the call that, a woman's body had been found, and he approached the address, and something was just tugging at his memory. It hit him. I've been to this house before. He was the one who investigated the missing persons case for Jean. And from the book, what I got from that was that he tried to attend the house heaps of times, but Keir was just never home. I think eventually they might have talked, but they just couldn't get anything, so the case ended up being closed. This second time, a few years later, he just assumed the worst. Jean had finally returned, but been killed in a violent domestic episode. But when he got there, he was told and found out it wasn't Jean. It was a second woman, and she was dead. So he's just like, whoa, alarm bells.
Yeah, what the heck is going on here?
Yeah. And reading about it from his point of view in the book was really just eye-opening. Now, on the day of the fire, on the morning of April 13th, 1991, a neighbour named Max Wormaleton had been paving his front driveway. He noticed Thomas Keir leave the house with his young son, driving his red Mazda van toward the local shops. Nothing unusual, until they returned. Instead of pulling into the driveway, Keir parked across the road from the house. He left his son in the van and ran into the house alone. 5 minutes later, he returned to the car and then he drove away again. It was only after this that Max noticed smoke coming from the house. At first he thought, Keir often burned rubbish in his backyard. So he's I've seen it before. But within just 10 minutes, thick black smoke was billowing from the windows. Max ran to help. He smashed a window, shouting to see if anyone was inside. A bedroom window exploded, sending glass across the lawn. Another neighbour joined him. They tried to fight the flames with a garden hose, but it was hopeless. The fire had taken hold. By the time the fire brigade arrived, the house was engulfed. Max told police he hadn't seen or heard anyone else enter the house. Other neighbours confirmed the same. Keir had left, returned briefly, and then he left again. Then the fire. There were no arguments, no screams, just the smoke. When Keir arrived home, emergency services were already there. So the police, the fire brigades, they were all there. He told police he had gone to the shops, picked up a few things, and when he came home, the house was just on fire. Detective Peter Seymour, who I mentioned earlier, was watching him very closely. Keir appeared to be grieving. He was hugging relatives, he was sobbing into his hands, and even collapsed at one point. But Detective Seymour had seen this before. The exaggerated display, the all-too-public grief. Sometimes the most convincing performance is the one you stage for the police. And the circumstances were extremely suspicious. Jean had vanished just a few years earlier, as we mentioned, and now Rosalina was dead in the same house. Paramedics noted that Keir had several small cuts and was mildly shocked, but otherwise he was unharmed. Inside the burned bedroom, firefighters found Rosalina. She was lying face down on the bed. Both her body and the bed were severely damaged. Around her neck was the cord from the bedside lamp. After tests were run, there was no signs of soot in her throat or her lungs, so it proved that she had died before the fire was lit. In the garage, investigators also found empty petrol containers. So later that day, the neighbour Max, he came to the police station to give a formal statement. He told police that Keir was a strange guy and that he often buried things in his backyard. A car engine, panels from the car, gates, chunks of concrete, and one other thing, a 44-gallon drum.
Good on the neighbour Max.
I know,
Good old
he was
observant.
really... He knew the times. He was just... We all need a neighbour like Max, okay?
We do.
So, During Keir's police interview, this was the day of the fire, he very calmly as usual explained his movements. He claimed he'd gone to the shops to buy presents for a family birthday. When asked for proof, he reached into his pockets and produced 4 receipts. 4 receipts, just like all together. He put them, on the table in front of him. I don't know why that stood out to me, but I'm just like, on the same day that his wife was murdered and burned in their bed in their house, it was brutal. I just don't know how you would think to collect your receipts and just like keep them in your pocket. Wouldn't they be like crumpled in a shopping bag or like stuffed into your wallet?
It's like, let's go find them, scrambling around trying to find which bag did I leave it in or did I throw it away?
Yeah.
Mm.
So if Keir was innocent for this, I feel like the implication is kind of absurd. That someone broke into their house, because this is going by all of what the neighbours said. Within 10 minutes after him leaving, there's flames coming out of the house. So Keir's saying that someone broke into the house in a 5-minute window, strangled his wife, doused the bedroom in petrol, and just set it on fire. Wasn't seen
In
by
silence.
Yeah. There was no screams heard, no neighbours saw anything. They also had a dog, a German
Yeah.
Shepherd, and they didn't,
Which a German Shepherd is a guard dog, So I don't envision someone just rocking up and no one knows about it. Like they would be alerted by the dog.
Yes, I have actually here, going forward a tiny bit, but in Keir's own words during this interview, they were asking about the dog. And he goes, yeah, he's a good watchdog, Sometimes he barked, sometimes he didn't, which kind of tells us nothing. Like a 6-year-old could offer a more convincing assessment of that dog, but I don't know what he was like trying to imply, that maybe someone could have slipped through undetected. He's like, oh yeah, sometimes he barks, sometimes he doesn't.
What makes him a good watchdog then if sometimes he doesn't bark? Like that's an insane contradiction.
Yes.
Conveniently contradictory Kia
Oh,
because
say that 3 times fast. So, he's in the police interview, and according to him, he went out to buy cigarettes. He returned briefly. So this is that short window. He returned to discuss birthday cards, and then he left again. When he was like pressed on exactly what was the discussion, he was pretty vague. But you don't need a round table to buy a birthday card. Like, he's like, well, I came home just to discuss the birthday card. And then he left again to probably get the present, the card. It's very red flag to me. But so when I'm researching this, I'm thinking, why would he kill Rosalina? There was no evidence Rosalina was having an affair, no record of conflict or threats, or even complaints. But what if that was the point? Rosalina was young, isolated, she'd newly arrived in Australia, and Keir had complete control just like he had with Jean. And I feel that power imbalance was extreme, again. I did find a poem written by Rosalina's mother. It's titled A Mother's Grief. Her mother wrote it on the 10th anniversary of her death. August 26, 1966, the day of your arrival. A blessing from Almighty God, an answer to an earnest prayer. But by a twist of fate, a gathering you attended where you met a man who made your heart sing. The first year of your union was bliss, but shortly after you were filled with anxiety over your partner's severity and jealousy. I grieve and plead that justice comes to right your horrid death, Rosalina. We can link that below if anyone wants to read the whole poem, but I think that gives a really good insight that obviously Rosalina was calling her mum, talking to her about what she was experiencing, which turned out to be very similar probably to what Jean had experienced. So this is what Rosalina's family believed Keir took. He took a daughter, a scholar, and a young woman who had her whole life in front of her. She was brutally murdered and burned inside the house she thought was her new home. And he just walked out of the house. He locked the door and he drove away. During Keir's interview, detectives noticed something strange. He had a semicircular cut just below his right ear. It was shaped like a crescent moon, and it looked exactly like a fingernail gouge, and it was fresh. Detectives asked about it. Keir shrugged. He said it happened earlier that day, or maybe the day before, while he was pulling staples from a lounge suite. An upholstery accident, or something like that, he wasn't sure. So Detective Seymour took photos of the cut. Now, not long before midnight, and this is the night of the fire, detectives actually charged Thomas Keir with the murder of Rosalina and with arson and intent to endanger life. From Keir, there was no reaction, no tears, no shouting, no denial, just a blank stare. And he said, "I never did it, and I'm getting the blame for it." My question here, though, I was a bit thrown that they charged him on the exact day. I'm just thinking, was it too early to charge him? Most evidence they had seemed circumstantial. There was no murder weapon, no eyewitness, no smoking gun. But the timeline, the neighbours, the body in the bed, none of it added up to innocence. Investigators believed they were looking at a serial domestic killer, and they weren't going to wait for him to strike again. So with Keir in custody, detectives moved super fast. A task force was assembled to dig into Jean Keir's disappearance. Statements started pouring in. Jean's bruises, her fear, her desperate attempts to escape, the death threats from Keir, controlling behaviour, and the psychological torment. The case against Keir for Jean's murder was building, but it was still very fragile. There was one missing piece, Jean. So going back a little bit here, it's February 1990. This is between Jean's disappearance and Rosalina's death. Keir briefly rented out the house that all of this has taken place in. Christine, Jean's mother, remembered helping Keir and Rosalina clean before he rented it out. She noticed a god-awful stench and remembered picking up a large bone in the backyard. She asked Keir, "What the heck are you feeding your dogs?" Later, when police tracked down the tenant, Denise Wilkes, she described the same stench. She called it rotten meat, a real dead smell, coming from her son's bedroom. Her dog kept dragging clumps of hair out from beneath the house.
What?
Mm-hmm.
Like, her dog, she's the tenant.
Mm-hmm. Only for a very short period, like maybe 6 months, like a small period of time.
But she has a dog, and
Mm-hmm.
it's just going, digging around and bringing clumps of hair back. Wow.
Yes, so obviously all of that was enough, those statements. The investigative team got a warrant, and on April 16, 1991, they returned to the house with that warrant. So they weren't just investigating Rosalina's murder there, they're digging now for Jean. The first dig didn't turn up much. Police found everything Keir and the neighbour had mentioned, that he'd buried concrete chunks, car parts, even that bizarre buried gate. But there was no sign of the 44-gallon drum that the neighbour Max had talked about. And no
Oh,
Jean.
Max.
Yeah, so officers started to wonder, had Keir moved her? Had he dug her up and reburied her somewhere else, hiding her inside the drum? They left empty-handed, so they didn't find anything. But not for long. Sometime later, while Keir was in prison, he was awaiting his sentencing for Rosalina's murder. A prison informant came forward. He told detectives that Keir had bragged about burying his first wife upright underneath the house. The area under the house had actually never been searched. So detectives went and got a second warrant. They returned to Wilkes Crescent for a deeper excavation. The first thing they found was small. They're thinking, possibly, is this a chicken bone? They sent it off for testing. The lab confirmed what detectives feared. It was human. Searchers were reinvigorated. They're like, we're onto this, we're doing it. Let's find Jean. So they kept digging and they found 6 more bones, 7 in total. They were all very small. They were all from one adult, but there was no skull and no big bones, just fragments, likely pieces Keir may have missed when he moved Jean's body. Maybe he thought they were too small to matter, or maybe he just didn't notice them. But they mattered. At the time, forensic technology was only emerging, and Australian laboratories could only confirm a few things. They could confirm that the bones were not very dried out, so they had likely only been underground for a few years, not for decades. They belonged to the same person. There was no duplicates. The person was an adult. They couldn't determine the sex or identity in Australia at that time at all. So for that, they had to send the bones to the US for cutting-edge DNA testing, along with DNA from Jean's parents, Christine and Clifford. Now, while all of this was going on with the multiple excavations in the backyard, collecting evidence and testimonies, the police were also building a strong case against Keir in the murder charge of Rosalina. He was standing accused of strangling her and setting fire to her and their home. The trial began in early 1993 at the Darlinghurst Supreme Court, with Justice Sully presiding. Keir was represented by legal aid, which in Australia means a state-funded defence for people who can't afford their own legal team. The jury was split. It was 6 men and 6 women from a range of backgrounds and a range of ages. The prosecution, so confident. There was no conclusive DNA evidence yet connecting Keir to Jean's disappearance, but they believed that they could prove what had happened to Rosalina. They believed they could get justice. The trial for Rosalina ran for weeks on end. Fire officers gave detailed testimony. They narrowed the fire's ignition to a 10-minute window, the same window where Keir had returned to the house to discuss birthday cards before driving off again. The prosecution argued that Keir, facing mounting financial pressures, killed Rosalina to claim her $80,000 life insurance payout, which I checked and is equivalent to about $190,000 in today's money, Australian. They described him as controlling and jealous and volatile, patterns echoed from his first marriage. The defence pushed a different theory, that someone else had entered the house while Keir was at the shops, killed Rosalina, started the fire, and left undetected. They showed home videos of Keir and Rosalina together, smiling, happy, affectionate. Almost 50 people gave evidence during the trial, all of which said they weren't aware of any problems in Rosalina or Keir's marriage. However, Jean and Rosalina's family were never asked to testify in court. But regardless, every day, Jean's family sat in court. Some of Rosalina's family even flew out from the Philippines to attend. Rosalina's mother, Esther, told reporters he was her first boyfriend. She was away from her family with no friends in Australia. She would fall in love with anyone who was nice to her. Her sister Ella painted a clearer picture of Rosalina's life behind closed doors. To summarize, she said, "It was like she was in hiding. She wasn't allowed to go anywhere alone. She called me, excited about buying a new car, but in the next call she was furious. Keir had lost $10,000 at the dog races. She said, 'I've been working hard and now we have no money.' She wanted to go back home." And throughout the trial, Keir showed no emotion. He took notes quietly every single day during the trial. He never cried, he didn't flinch. He eventually chose to speak, and he told the court how much he loved Rosalina, and insisted that he hadn't killed her, that someone else had committed the murder while he was out shopping. So now it was time for the jury to deliberate. At one point during the lengthy deliberations, the jury asked the judge to clarify the meaning of reasonable doubt. Then they returned with their verdict. Keir was found not guilty. The courtroom was stunned. Rosalina's family were devastated. For her mother and sister, it was like losing her all over again, only this time they'd lost justice too. In the days that followed, Keir launched a media blitz. He gave interviews to anyone who would listen, blamed police, accused them of a smear campaign, and insisted he'd been unfairly targeted. He even offered a $50,000 reward for information leading to the conviction of Rosalina's killer. And yeah, he offered that reward when he had been on legal aid. I don't know where that $50,000 was going to come from, but maybe it is easier to offer these big rewards when you're not expecting anyone to ever collect it.
Yeah. Unless they're turning him in. My goodness. This guy, he just talks like just whatever he wants to say. Oh gosh.
I know. So there was public response, obviously, to what happened in Rosalina's trial. I think one of the most cutting responses from D. Dyson Hunt from the Solidarity Philippines Australia Network quoted what the judge had said. Mr. Keir loved his wife. The fact that he sent her flowers on her birthday, 4 days before her death, is some indication of his feelings toward her. D replied with the poem, I Got Flowers Today, which is a piece often used to highlight the dissonance between acts of affection and cycles of abuse. I won't read that poem here, but it was absolutely devastating to read. Definitely epitomizes, domestic violence. And I think it was just so crazy for the judge, so wild for the judge to say that. One thing I wanted to point out as well is that some of the reporting on Rosalina at the time was downright revolting. She was frequently reduced to the trope of mail order bride and implying falsely that she'd come from poverty and latched onto a wealthy Australian man as her ticket to a better life. Rosalina was highly educated. She was from a middle-class family. She had a degree in commerce and accounting. She actually propped Keir's business up when it was failing with her own money. She worked those 2 jobs to support them. She wasn't dependent on him. He was dependent on her.
Totally.
I suppose the jury isn't allowed to read any information. I don't think they're allowed to read any articles or anything, but I'm just wondering if anything like that affected how the jury saw Rosalina. I'm just wondering if that had an impact on the outcome for that trial. I wonder if Rosalina had been born in Sydney from a middle-class family, would the murder trial have ended the same way? It obviously doesn't change what the outcome was at the end. Well, although Keir had walked free for Rosalina's murder, investigators hadn't forgotten about Jean. The 7 bones investigators had found in the backyard of Keir's house were flown to America to hopefully find some answers. In 1997, after years of waiting, results finally came back. DNA was nothing like we know today, and it worked much more slowly, and getting an answer was not always a possibility. Forensic biologist Robert Gowitz concluded it was approximately 660 times more likely that these bones belonged to a child of Christine and Gaspar than a random person from the Australian population. That is the direct quote from the forensic biologist in America. They said Christine and Gaspar, and even though literally from the book and all of the research I did, her dad's name was Cliff, Jean didn't have another father in the picture. It was Christine and Cliff. But I did just want to use the exact quote. Yeah, just a little bit of explanation there. So in simpler terms, the bones were almost certainly Jean Keir's. Now, Keir was finally charged with Keir's murder. They had the DNA evidence. And what followed was a complete mess of legal battles. 3 trials, 3 appeals, and a whole lot of heartbreak for Jean's family. During the trials, Keir's defense relied heavily on one narrative, that Jean was still alive and she'd chosen to disappear. And surprisingly, he wasn't the only one who claimed this. His mother, Joan Keir, said she had seen Jean 3 times, once shortly after she went missing in 1988, and again in both 1998 and 1999. She also claimed to have overheard phone calls between Thomas and Jean. Keir's son, Michael, said he saw his mother twice, once in 1992 when he would have been around 7, and again in 1999. He said he'd recognised her from family photographs. Keir's father also backed up the story, claiming Jean had called him as well. One more witness, Jennifer Amos, a former school friend of Jean's, testified that she saw someone she believed to be Jean in October 1988, just 8 months after Jean disappeared. But for me, that story didn't quite hold, because I think if Jean said I'd had a baby by November, then in October, when Jennifer Amos said she saw her, Jean would have been, visibly pregnant or carrying a newborn. And Jennifer didn't mention either of these things. So beyond that, why would Jean contact Keir's parents but not her own?
Yeah, exactly.
Yeah. During one of the later trials, Justice Peter Johnson reviewed all of these alleged sightings and phone calls, and he actually dismissed them. He called the testimony tenuous and flawed. In his words, none of it stood up to scrutiny. There was no credible evidence that Jean was alive after February 1988. So we'll just break down the timeline of the legal battles that both Keir and Jean's family went through. On the 17th of September 1999, Keir was found guilty for Jean's murder. He was sentenced to 24 years with a non-parole period of 18. February 2002, so a few years later, the conviction was overturned. It was found the judge had misdirected the jury on how to interpret the DNA evidence. The argument was the judge had said there's a 660,000 to 1 chance the bones weren't Jean's. Apparently is very different statistically from saying it's 660 times more likely that they were Jean's. So crazy technicality.
Bit of confusion.
Yeah, it got overturned. So in October 2002, Keir stood for a second trial and he was found guilty again. He was sentenced to 22 years and 16 non-parole. Later, another appeal, that conviction was also thrown out. It was found that the jury had searched Keir's history online and found out about his previous trial for Rosalina's murder. So again, thrown out. The final trial took place in December 2004. This time it was by a judge alone. There was no jury. Justice Michael Campbell, he found Keir guilty. He said, "I'm satisfied that the verdict of guilty of murder was reasonable and supported by the evidence, and that no miscarriage of justice has resulted." So at the end of the day, Keir received a sentence of 22 years with a minimum of 16. Thank God.
Yeah, finally.
When the first 1999 conviction was thrown out, like the first time for Jean, Christine, her mother, spoke to the press. She said, "Now it's been 14 years since she disappeared. We have to go through the whole thing again. I cried buckets during the trial, all that heartache. I just can't believe it." And can you blame her? They'd waited over a decade just to find 7 bones, and now they had to endure years of courtroom arguments, statistical nitpicking, and repeat trauma. After the first trial, when Christine and Clifford arrived home that day, there was a bunch of flowers and an envelope waiting for them. It was a letter from one of the jury members. I thought I would read it out because I thought it was just so wonderfully written. It said, "Dear Mrs. Strawn, over the 6 weeks of the trial, I felt I really came to know Jean. I think all 12 of us developed a bond with your family, as we all learned of the anguish and pain you have endured since the loss of such a beautiful person. I hope you will take some comfort from the swift and unequivocal nature of our verdict. I send you these flowers as a token of appreciation for the strength you have shown over the past 11 years. You have shown resolute determination and perseverance to see that justice is done. I believe this to be an inspiration to us all. I hope that you will also accept them as a tribute to Jean. She paid the ultimate price for her individuality. Jean had dreams and aspirations to better herself and the future for her son. All of us have such dreams in life, and we will learn to treasure these all the more for knowing Jean. I'm thankful for having known her. She will always have a special place in my heart. Kind regards, Jura. I thought that was just such a beautiful message to send. And Christine, I'm pretty sure that I read that she kept that note forever.
Yeah, it was like perfectly worded.
It was. Now, a little bit on the aftermath of this. So in August 2006, Keir, he was actually rejected after he submitted a compensation bid for $750,000, claiming police had maltreated him following the death of Rosalina. He claimed he'd been unlawfully arrested and detained at the police station, but obviously it was rejected.
My gosh.
The gall.
It just never ends.
I know. He loved the media too, I believe. He loved having his name out there.
The attention and all that. Sounds like.
So Rosalina's mother, Esther, said while she was in Sydney, I've been busy trying to seek help from different people and solicitors to reopen the case of my daughter's tragic death, but the results are too disappointing. We'll just leave it to the Lord then. I still have faith in him, and I know he won't fail me. Please pray for me so that I may have the strength to go on. I'm sure this is similar around the world, but under Australia's criminal justice law, an accused person who is acquitted of a crime cannot be tried again for the same crime unless new evidence emerges. So obviously for Rosalina's case, he was found not guilty and can't be retried for that, which, as we mentioned before, it's so hard to even imagine for Rosalina's family what that means.
It's devastating.
Well, where does it leave us? So Thomas Keir was never found guilty of Rosalina's murder, and in the eyes of the law, he remains innocent of that crime. He was, however, found guilty of murdering Jean Keir. After years of evasion, appeals, retrials, and pain for those who loved her, he did serve time, probably not enough, most people would agree. Still, justice and truth are not always the same thing. And if this case has shown us anything, it's that what's legal doesn't always feel just, and what's just can't always be proven in court. But what can be said truthfully and with no ambiguity is this. 2 women are dead. 1 vanished from her life. 1 was burned in her own home. And their lives were so much more than how they ended. Jean, the loving mother, a good friend and a sister, a daughter who called her parents daily. Rosalina was just 24, educated, driven, and generous. She had a laugh that her family still remembers. Their deaths should never have happened, and it shouldn't be the only thing we remember about them. I think if this case stirs anything in you, let it be this. Pay attention and speak up when something doesn't feel right. Because silence, polite silence, cultural silence, family silence, it can kill. We'll never know every detail, but we know enough. We know enough to be angry. We know enough to remember, and enough to make sure that Jean and Rosalina's stories aren't lost to a headline or a courtroom technicality. That is the end of that case. As you can see, it was something that just stuck with me, and I think it's going to stick with me for a really long time. So, what do you think really happened to Rosalina? Let us know. Tell us your theories, send us your rage, your heartbreak. Chuck us a comment or DM us on Instagram at Cozy Crime Club Pod. If you've got a theory that keeps you up at night, we want to hear it.
We sure do. Thanks so much for getting cozy with us today, guys. Thank you so much, Jess, for bringing us that case tonight. There was a lot to unpack from that one. Really, really devastating case and really important to shed some light on it. So thank you so much for what you've done there. And if you enjoyed this episode, leave us a review, share the club with a friend or comment below, join us on YouTube, Instagram, and Spotify. And until next time, stay curious, stay kind, and stay cozy.